There are three worlds that humans currently inhabit. The first is the internet world, you have the civilized world, and then you have the natural world. We need to know how to navigate all of them. And today I'm going to go in depth and show you why you need to know how to navigate all of them, especially as a conscious person. It is important that we know all these three worlds. So let's get into it and let's talk about all three of these different realities that we exist in, because I think that a lot of people, especially when it comes to nature and coming into the natural world, they want to get away from everything else, and we kind of demonize and want to get away from technology and the internet and things of that nature. But I want to share with you today why I think it's important that we utilize these resources, that we utilize these worlds to be able to propel us and get closer to our natural world, if that's our goal and what we have in mind. So first, let's talk about the internet world. This is where we're at right now. This is how you're watching me right now. It's literally a digital world, right? This information that you're hearing and the sounds that you're hearing, the image that you're seeing on your screen, it's been transcoded, right? It's not the true reality. It's not, you're not here experiencing it directly, but instead this is information that is being recorded through one device, transcoded, sent through a series of networks, and then being received by your device, decoded and projected to you, right? So this is all happening very quickly and it's happening very seamlessly, but this isn't the real world. Like I had, if anybody saw the reel that I made, which this is the follow-up to, about the three worlds, some people said, well, all three of them are the real world. No, the internet is most definitely not the real world, because it's literally giving you a interpretation, uploading and downloading of information. It's not direct information to where if you were in front of me, you could feel and see me directly. This is being transcribed. And so one of the things that the internet does is that it distorts reality, right? So we're existing in a world where we're getting a lot of information, saturated amount of information, images, videos, audio, pictures, memes. All this information is we're getting bombarded with every single day, right? So this is not the real world. Don't get it twisted. When you're online, realize that you are getting a distorted version of reality. You're getting a version of reality from somebody who might have experienced something, then took that experience and interpreted through their own understanding, and then might have distorted it and projected out into the world for a certain narrative. So that's the dangerous part about the internet world, is that people have that capacity, especially with the artificial intelligence and all these technologies that are unraveling, that are allowing people to replace entire faces, entire voices, and our very tangible world is kind of being broken apart right before us, to the point where if you're so consumed with the internet, you will have a perception of the world that isn't necessarily reflective of the real world. And that is one of the biggest ways that we're currently being manipulated, or we're allowing ourselves to be manipulated as human beings, that we're playing into this role, into this device, and allowing it to dictate our perception of the world. So now people aren't tuned into their present reality as much as they are into their phone. So they're living life through that device, which is giving them distorted information of the real world. So rather than us standing here and being like, well, what am I experiencing? What does the world look like for me in my current place and time? We're not doing that anymore. Now we're looking into the phone and saying, well, look, the world is fucked up because look at what is happening here. There's injustice here. There's injustice there. The world is going through all kinds of stuff because look at what I see on my device. But when you look out into your world, it's like, I don't really see none of that. People are generally pretty good. I mean, you disagree with people every day as part of life, and there's certain situations that make you uncomfortable that you rather not have, but it's not the type of reality that we're being pushed on these devices, right? So that's one of the things about the internet world, that it distorts reality. Another thing is that people behave in a way that they wouldn't behave in the other worlds, in the civilized world or in the natural worlds. So one of the things, this is the troll communities, right? This is the emergence of people who feel like they can say whatever they want on the internet, but they don't necessarily feel like there's repercussions as there is in the civilized world or in the natural world. So it creates a break apart in the person's sense of self, right? A ego is created that is particular to this world. Because when you see that person in real life, they're not behaving like they do on the internet. They're not saying the things that they say on the internet, and they're not being disrespectful the way they are on the internet in person, because now they're in a different world, right? So on the internet, people create alter egos for themselves because they feel, because there's a sense of safety of being able to say whatever you think and not having to have repercussions for it, because it is through a digital device. So that's where we get a lot of people trolling and cyberbullying and things of this nature, to where people are being led to feel like they can say whatever they want without repercussions. This isn't reality. That's another reason why the internet world isn't the real world, because in the real world, there's repercussions for you saying a derogatory statement to somebody. There's repercussions for you being disrespectful to somebody or spreading misinformation about somebody. This is why the internet isn't the real world. This is why the internet is a false world. So that's another thing that we got to be mindful about the internet. When you're hearing something spread about somebody, or it could be about something, take it with a grain of salt and realize that information, don't take it for face value, because people have agendas and people distort information on the internet, and I have felt it myself, and I've experienced it myself, to the point where police show up to your place where you live because of something somebody said online that has no relevance to reality. But now the internet is manipulating reality. Now it's having a secondary and tertiary effects on reality, because people are so tuned into this internet world that they believe that it reflects accurately the real world. It doesn't. Like, we have to cut that shit out. We have to realize the internet isn't the real world. What you see on there, what you hear on there, don't just go on believing it just because you see it somewhere on the internet. Even if somebody has a lot of followers, even if it has a lot of likes, even if it feels like it's true, leave some room for the possibility that is not 100% of the story and it's not factual. Because if we move on every impulse that we see on the internet, that is not conducive. And that's why the police showing up to my house because of somebody saying something online, because somebody took some information and they didn't know the whole story, or they got in their feelings and emotions about it, and now they made action in the real world that's having an effect on people that's not even based in reality. So that's what I'm talking about with the internet. It's not a real world. It's a simulated world that is distorting and misrepresenting true information. And in this world, misinformation spreads, and it spreads like wildfire. Y'all seen it. Somebody makes a meme, and if the meme looks legit enough, people will take it for face value. They're not going to do further research. They're not going to look further into it. They're just going to say, well, it looks legit. This person has 100,000 followers, so it must be true. And that's where I'm having to go back and retrace some of those things that I've taken for face value, and that I've even put myself out there, and have to dispel these myths that have been kind of passed around as truth, right? Like, you have these things, people say things like, dairy causes mucus, meat causes mucus, just simple stuff like that, right? Or any types of, I was around a lot with the diet, so I know a lot about like the diet means, but just stuff like that where people will take it and be like, okay, that's fact, somebody said it, so let's spread that around, but they never really truly looked into it or had an experiential experience where they felt it and knew it through experience, so that's the difference between that. So beliefs from the internet affect the other worlds. They affect the civilized world and they affect the natural world, because people, for instance, will see something online and they will make life changes based off what they've seen on the internet, not having the full story, not having the full understanding. They will change their reality, right? So now we're having effects on the civilized world. It's shaping the way politics is happening. It's shaping the way grocery stores are stocking items and the way corporations are developing products. You know, all of that is being shaped by the internet. And the natural world, you know, there's pros and cons to it because the internet is also pushing for a lot of eco-friendly you know, just sustainable ways of life on the earth because of information that we see on the internet. So this is also having an effect on the way the natural world is being used for resources and how people are moving when it comes to the natural world, right? So even though the internet is not the real world, it does have an effect on the real world. It does have an effect on the civilized world because people take the information that they receive through the internet and then they apply it to their life or incorporate the principles and beliefs of that information into their other worlds that they take with them. So even though it's not a real world, we still have to be mindful that this information does play a role in the other worlds. Okay, so that's enough about the internet. I'm going to go into civilization, and I'll go through the comments afterwards, but I just want to get through this. So the civilized world, right? That's the world where most of us have been born into. That's the world that has been around. Civilization has been around maybe 10,000 years in many different forms, but most of us are familiar with that world, the civilized world. This is where people are born in the hospital and you're raised in the school system. You're raised to get a career, go to college, have a job. And there's a lot of indoctrination that's happening at this point within this civilized world, right? We have certain sets of beliefs, moral codes, social codes that aren't necessarily objective. They're based in a subjective view of the world pertaining to the culture that we're born into. So here in America, there might be a certain culture that passes laws, like things might be legal based off of what that culture deems to be permissive. And in Europe, that might be different. In Switzerland, Australia, different countries, that might be a different type of thing. So in this civilized world, we have social pressures. This is where we actually are having contact. It's not like the internet world because we're having physical contact with each other, but it's within the confines of civilization, right? So civilization is a world that has been constructed on top of the natural world. We put concrete, we put cement, asphalt, and we suppress the natural world of that area and build up and erect cities, houses, suburbs, grocery stores, businesses. We put this on top of the natural world, and that's where we live. And people don't typically go out of the perimeter of civilization, but except for recreational activities. Maybe they might go on a hike, but they always come back to the civilized world. They always come back to civilization. So they exist within civilization. They live within civilization. They're familiar with civilization, and that is a world that they inhabit, right? So in civilization, there is laws. You know, we have laws, like I was saying. These laws are subjective based on the perspective of the civilization, of the culture that arises. Like the reason you can't just go out without any clothes into the street is because the culture that has driven these laws found it not permissible to do that. There's a social taboo that does not allow people to be in their natural state. And this is regulated by laws and is regulated by social pressures, and people self-regulate, right? Because at this point, people don't feel comfortable with themselves either because of the program they've been given. So if somebody was to go and do that and walk out into the street without no sexual intention, without no intention to approach or harm anybody, that would already be very, very taboo in that world. A behavior that in the natural world is completely logical and in tune with that world, in the civilized world, is a unlawful taboo that can result in serious consequences. So there's many things like this. There's many laws that are passed, that are erected, that are created to adhere to our culturally created standards of life. And of course, in this world, you're expected to get a job, you're expected to have a career, you're expected to participate in the advancement and progression of this world, civilization. If not, you're not being a productive member of society, because civilization must evolve, must keep going, must grow. For whatever reason, there is this belief in civilization that things must evolve within it, and must keep growing in the direction that it is going. So we are disconnected. One of the big things that I notice about civilization, and that I kind of have been exposing myself to more, is this idea that we're disconnected from not only birth, but also death. We don't see life come into this world, and we also kind of shield and tuck it behind a curtain when it leaves this world. So for instance, like, how many people have actively participated in giving birth to their children, were there to see it, or actually just were there visibly for that process? Even that in itself is kind of like a big deal, where in the natural world, that's kind of just the natural order of things, right? So many people don't get to see that. We kind of put it in a room and close it off, and not very much exposed to that in many ways, but especially when it comes to death. Death is something that we definitely hide behind the curtain. We put it in institutions, right? When people are getting closer to that period of time in their life where they're getting close to passing, we put them in institutions where, like, well, we don't really want to see that or deal with that, because we don't really take too well to that. And especially when people die, we cover them up. It is a taboo to be exposed to death. And I think that's a derivative of a lot of the things that we do in life, in a lot of the cultures and belief systems, especially in the New Age community, have came about from this disconnection from death, from this disconnection from the natural processes of the natural world. So the way I look at it, I'm reintroducing myself, as well as anybody who's on my platform, to the form of spirituality that encompasses life and death, that encompasses hardship, that encompasses challenges presented to us by reality, and rather than trying to escape or create a world that suppresses or stops all these challenges, but learning to live with them and using them to propel ourselves to grow and become greater within our own self. That's the form of spirituality that I'm reintroducing myself to, but I think there's something to that about being disconnected from death. And also, we're disconnected from our food supply. The primary thing that gives us life, what sustains our body, every cell in our body, we're disconnected from that 100%. If you're living, especially if you live in the city, I mean, some people might grow a couple things here and there, but it is not at a level where they're depending on that. At the end of the day, they know that if they want food, they can go to a grocery store. They might grow herbs, or they might grow things here and there, just for fun or as a hobby, or to post on the other world, social media, the internet world. But it is not a dependent thing. So they still know at the end of the day they can go to a grocery store and receive the food that they need. So being disconnected from the food supply, that has an immense impact on the psychological, the social aspects of people, because we feel a sense of security by having that part of our needs met, as well as shelter. We have shelter provided for. We have shelters that already exist. We just have to be willing to pay a price to exchange to live there, where in the natural world, that's a different story. So yeah, that's about it. Civilization, right? It's a simulated place. It's not real because it depends on other worlds to exist. It fabricates identities for people that don't reflect the nature of the person's identity, but instead gives them an identity to adopt, and enforces it to the point of being unlawful to not enforce it or not practice it. So you might get arrested if you don't abide by the things in the social norms of this world, even when they're objectively reasonable in the natural world, in other worlds. But because of our culture that has created these laws, there's consequences to them in the civilized world. So let's talk about the third world, the real world, the natural world. This is the original world. Without this world, the other worlds don't exist. The internet world does not exist. Civilization does not exist. They all use the resources of the natural world to create these artificial worlds. So, natural world, there is no time. It's timeless. It's eternal. It just is. It's happening. whether you like it or not. You can resist it, you can build things to put on top of it, but you're going to have to keep maintaining that because nature is pervasive. It's going to grow through the cracks on the concrete. It's going to proliferate its seeds of its wild plants everywhere, no matter how hard you try. It's just an ongoing battle for people in the civilized world to try to suppress nature, because nature is the original world. Like, that's just always going to be true. Like, this is the real world. In nature, you see, the thing you got to realize is that humans behave differently in each one of these worlds. And that's the primary key thing that we have to point out. Who people are on the internet isn't who they are in civilization, and who they are in civilization isn't who they are in the natural world, in the wild. Each world creates distinctly different behaviors because they're distinctly different worlds. So in the natural world, there still is culture, right? We see traditional cultures, indigenous people still have their way of life and still have even taboos. They even have some taboos. They might not eat a certain thing because of a belief system that they have. And so even in the natural world, you do see that. So the reason that it exists in civilization is because it's a derivative of a natural behavior that exists within humans. But in this world, there is no slave patrol or police to enforce this belief system, right? It's like there is no set of written laws that dictate how everyone should be upon a piece of land. It's mostly people and their ability to enforce it using their tribe. The people in their tribe, like the tribe enforces the area that they're in. But the thing about this world, I don't know if many people have experienced a human in this way or experienced themselves in this world. Most of us are very familiar with civilized behavior, with internet behavior, but this behavior is different from the civilized behavior. It expresses itself in a way physically about its body. First of all, humans in the natural world don't have the taboo of civilized people that we have to wear clothes. Like, a lot of the times in me embracing the natural world and getting back to the roots, these ancestral ways of being, I have been told, why don't you put on a shirt? And why aren't you wearing a shirt? And to me, that question is rooted in the programming that person has received, to where they feel uncomfortable to see somebody without a shirt, because for them, it might represent something other than what it truly is. So it might represent some sort of sexual behavior, or it might represent some sort of ego behavior. They might think I'm trying to show off. And maybe I feel like I'm muscular or something like that. They might think that that's where that behavior is stemming from. But in reality, it's just stemming from a exposure to the natural world and the fact that I happen to live in a world that is conducive to me wearing clothing. So clothing in the natural world reflects the environment and is not subjective, right? It's not like this belief system like, well, I think people should be wearing this much clothes because, of this moral thing. It doesn't come from a moral place. It comes from a very objective, functional place. It's a functional behavior. So in northern climates, the climates where it's colder, they don't wear clothes because they believe the men and the women should be clothed as to not expose themselves. It's more about functionality and survivability in being that much embracing your environment. So in the tropical regions, you're just going to see a lot less clothing because that's the flow of that environment. That's what that environment is calling for. So that's the two distinct differences that I see as far as what we wear in our bodies as humans, And I mean, there are so many, but another one that I would point out is we have a standard for the physical form of male and female that doesn't reflect in the natural world. Like in the natural world, you don't see men just picking up stuff and working out all the time because their bodies are more shaped by what they have to do to survive and thrive in that environment. So if they require to walk a lot or climb things, they might be more muscular in their upper body. If they can have to climb things, they have to run a lot, they might be more slim, like the San in the Kalahari, and like these people are doing persistence hunting where they're chasing down animals. That's going to shape their body in a certain way, while other tribes who might, be more hunter in the jungle where they don't necessarily have to run, they might have to climb things, they might have more upper body strength. So this is what I'm talking about. The shape and look of our bodies in nature is dictated by our ecology and what we have to do to sustain there. But in the civilized world is dictated by dictated by perception, by morality or vanity, or things that don't necessarily have any function to them. They just, people think that this is attractive, so that's what they do to build their bodies up in that way. So let me see. In the natural world, humans are more authentic. They express themselves when they want to express themselves. They don't do things to appease to the things that we would in the civilized world, right? Because they don't care. Like I don't care about money. Why would I try to be nice to you or cater to you to try to get something from you if I live in a world where I can take care of myself, where I could provide for myself, I can get food for myself, I could live off the land for myself, I could build shelter for myself. Why do I have to be nice to you or carry you in a way just to get something out of you? See, that's a different behavior. In the civilized world, you see that a lot. People constantly trying to get things from one another because we've taken on the concept of possessions and we've taken on the concept of ownership. So if I know you own something, socially, I know I can behave in a way to where I'll be nice to you, and that'll increase my chances of maybe getting some of that wealth from you for myself, So there's definitely a social aspect to behavior when you're dependent on resources from other people. But when you can depend on that for yourself, when you have sovereignty over your food supply, over your shelter, over your land, over your life, you have no incentive to be unauthentic. You have no incentive to not be genuine, because you exist with life in the most genuine way possible. You don't have to be fake. You don't have to try to appease to nobody. So that's a distinct behavior that exists in that natural world. Yeah, so in nature, humans living with the land will have a deep connection to it. They would know the animals, they would know the plants, the different species. They may not look at them in terms of the civilized world. So when we're going back from a civilized perspective, looking at the natural world, we say things like plants are resources. We say things like nature has resources, but people living amongst the land, amongst nature, they wouldn't look at it as resources. They would look at it as family, as kin. Many indigenous people do in fact look at plants and animals as their own people. Like there you have the tea leaf people behind me. This is a tea leaf people. It's a non-human person that exists. It's not a human, but it's still a person. It's still an entity. And I see it here, it might pop up over there, we might see clusters of it here, but that's that nation. That's the nation of people of the tea plant. And then just like with the animals, like might be like that's the mongoose kingdom. That's the kingdom of people from mongoose. Like they see the life around them as different forms of itself because they're that intimate with it. Whereas from the civilized world, we look at it as resources, like something that we can gain for ourselves, something that we could take from the environment and use for our own benefit. We don't have a relationship to it to the point where we look at it as our kin, as relatives. The only way we relate to it is if it can do something for us. And that's a big difference, because we come from the world where we do need resources to depend on and to buy our food and to shelter ourselves. This creates a psychological view of life to where we're saying, well, what can I get out of that? What can I get out of that? We never think about what we can give or how we can relate to this in any other way other than to exploit it. You know what I mean? So it goes deep. It goes deep, and these are just some of the things. Yeah, but in nature, we would experience life and death, right? We would see children being born. We would take part of that process. We would see very intimately humans living and dying, and even animals living and dying, we would be part of that process. Death wouldn't be nothing that was sheltered from humans or from the community. It would be something that we would be exposed to. And I'm not saying that we wouldn't experience mourning or we wouldn't experience emotional pain from that, but we would definitely not hide it and pretend that it doesn't exist or tuck it away to institutions elsewhere. We would have an intimate relationship with that process, and that process itself would shape and mold our psychological view of the world. And that would entail a deeper spiritual belief system. We would have to embody it just to exist in that world. In this world, we can lose our spirituality because we can still have life, right? We'll have people who bring us food, people who shelter us and protect us. In that world, just by mere virtue of what it is, we would be more spiritual. We would be more spiritually connected in a way to relate to what the hell is happening. You would have to make spiritual sense of it at that point, because you wouldn't have the convenience of it being taken care for you or being tucked away somewhere else. You would have to have a spiritual interpretation of life at that point as a psychological survival mechanism. So when we get away from that, that's when people become less spiritual. They think, oh, well, this shit, it's all nothing. It's all science, and it's just because you just reading books on the internet, people delivering food to you. It just feels like you control the world. But when you're out in the real world, in nature, the things that you go through in that world will shape your spiritual belief system, and that would be more of a necessity in that world, because you will have to make sense of it. You have to ease your mind, and you will have to relate to it on a deeper level than you'd have to in civilization, or you have to on the internet world, which is even further removed. So yeah, that's about it. Let me read through some of these comments. Those are the three worlds. And some people kept asking about the spiritual realm or the spiritual world. Everything is spirit. Everything is spirit. So I don't look at it as a separate world. I'm talking about the tangible worlds that we exist in tangibly, that if you ask anybody in the world, they would know pretty much the internet, civilization, and nature. They would have some familiarity with these three worlds. I'm not talking about the worlds that you, astral world, and none of that. I'm talking about the worlds that we exist here now, because even in those worlds, you don't live there, okay? Even if you have an experience in the astral world, you always come back here, and you're always obligated to take that information, that wisdom that you learned in that short amount of time that you might experience that world. You're obligated to bring it back here and to work out on it in this world, to express it in this world. So that's why I focus on this world, because this is the world, like, we're here to be here until we're no longer here. So while we're here, let's be here. And there's a big pattern that happens that we want to be in other worlds, other dimensions, but I'm just trying to ground myself and others around me. I feel like I'm a grounding force, right? To be here, present in this world. I feel like we might come a time where we might look back and say, man, we had an amazing opportunity on Earth, and while we were there, we were thinking about being over there, being in the next lifetime, and being over here, and we never truly embodied and embraced here, the Earth, now, this reality.